Now let's face a few facts right off. To call this a launch is stretching the very limits of the meaning of that word. The book is already well clear of the slipway. Where I buy books, it's been a staff pick for weeks, it's been reviewed for over a fortnight, and it's making its own way out there under its own steam with no help from me, like one of those ghost ships that appear from time to time off the magical coast Nicolas is mapping. So let's call this a celebration, okay? Not a launch, a celebration. Let's celebrate Nicolas's absolute disdain for the ordinary language of journalism, for the ordinary preoccupations of our trade, for the ordinary and tightly policed terms of reference we're expected to work by. This is a writer who is happy to wonder what Talleyrand would make of two 1960s mobile classrooms abandoned on the outskirts of Alice Springs. Perhaps he has his narrator telling the caretaker of this junk, perhaps eventually you could even integrate them with the artworks in the garden, like the pavilions at Sans Souci or Nymphenburg. Now, only a fearless imagination could come out with that. An imagination that is not afraid of skirting the edges of ridicule in order to take us into his world and show us precisely and unexpectedly what he sees. This is a book about fearless European imaginations drawn to the most inhospitable stretches of Australia, including his own imagination. And they're searching for glory and pain and gold and God. And as a character called Charlie Ferns tells the narrator on an early trip to Lake Disappointment, hunting for salvation of some kind. Now, I have to confess to an earthbound Presbyterian imagination. The Red Highway took me into country so dreamlike, so strange, that I did a bit of Googling along the way, checking up, wondering where I was, wondering what's real. It's no criticism of the Red Highway to guess that many readers will have the same doubts as me, that a book so richly evocative, so exotic, could be anything this side of fiction. Well, Kupka turned out to be real. Karel Kupka existed. And I included in last year's collection of best essays a fragment, all that had been published at the time, of Nicolas's account of Kupka's art gathering in the north. And the whole account is here in the Red Highway, and it is a flawless biographical sketch. Now, there are some warning details here. There is a blind man who wanders up to the narrator in Darwin Cathedral, a man blind from birth who demonstrates the fact by lifting his dark glasses and showing that his eyes have actually been sewn closed, and yet is able to give a very precise and detailed account of Kupka's Madonna hanging on the wall, its colouring and its construction. So we are fairly warned that we are in strange territory here. But Google tells me that Kalamburu is on the map and there really was a Father Seraphim Sants. Though whether he was any good at arm wrestling at the age of 90 is not a subject that I can settle one way or the other on Google. Albert Calvert is there, of course. He's in the history books. There's no doubting Calvert. Even the ruse shooter and philosopher Charlie Ferns turns up on a CSIRO website in a list of fishermen who are commended for handing in the tags from the fish they catch. But what you won't find on Google, and is deeply shadowed in these pages, is the narrator himself. None of the bush characters who claim to know him well address him by name. Now, true, this faceless figure, the often mentioned I of the text, has had a career that shadows that of Nicolas Rothwell, one-time war correspondent, who fills with his fine prose the wide-open spaces of the Australian. But I think we'd be wrong to assume that they're one and the same. I mean, think about this seriously. Even in the Murdoch camp, where money means nothing, what journalist these days is going to be given the time, the freedom, and the limitless travel budget the narrator of The Red Highway enjoys as he simply follows his whims around Central and Northern Australia. No, we have to be clear here. Nicolas has created a narrator to suit his purposes. Curious, impulsive, romantic, at times bumbling, driven by dreams that can prove naive, mocked by old hands for his ignorance, unsure what he's seeking, far from clear about the meaning of much that he finds, but always travelling through the landscape with sharp eyes. This is a painter's book as much as it's a writer's book. It's saturated in the light and colour of the centre and the north. Now, I don't say this lightly because very few writers are actually capable of doing this, but Nicolas has the power to take us there. But I get the feeling sometimes that he would chuck all these words away if only he could reach what he was reaching for with paint. But it's also a journalist's book in this high sense, that he is a storyteller and the characters he gathers, the people he's drawn to, are storytellers. This is a collection of stories, mostly of men on quests of one kind or another, stories told around campfires, on endless days driving corrugated roads, stories that fill in the time, stories that make sense of the landscape and illuminate the people who tell them. What is so wonderful about Nicolas's storytelling is his fascination with how great stories come to us, rarely in one hit, but in fragments, bits and pieces over time, so that the gathering of them becomes part of our lives. And the point of it all? Well, each of us will decide that for ourselves, and there are probably few people in this room who haven't already travelled the Red Highway and answered that question for themselves. For me, the highway led to one of the rare, untouched corners of the desert that Charlie Ferns, one of my favourites in the book, that Charlie Ferns took the narrator to very early on, where, Nicolas writes, where the country is unspoiled. There's nothing alien, no plant that doesn't belong, nothing foreign in the landscape. This book seems to me to be about disappearances, about the disappearance of people and of art and time and authenticity and perhaps even purity. It's about the search for these things, that the search is worthwhile, even if there is perhaps not much hope that we'll ever find them, but is worth it for its own sake. Thank you, Nicolas, for this book. Thank you for bringing this landscape fiercely alive, of rescuing it from banality and scandal and tedium, the tedium often of news, and investing it with your deeply, deeply European imagination. Congratulations.
Dear friends and new friends, thank you all very much for coming tonight. David, I can't tell you how much it means to me as a writer to have a sense of a reader getting and understanding in a profound way, in a direct way, tonally, intellectually, emotionally, on every level, what it is that I've been trying to assemble and set before any reader. I was overjoyed to hear that you'd agreed to say a few words here tonight, because when I was trying to work out my own relationship with words, you played a very important part, unconsciously, in my trying to reach an accommodation between the impulse to be a good and efficient journalist and the impulse to soar and to let one's imagination flower in writing. I can remember many pieces of yours which I would read over and cherish, and which I felt would show a kind of seriousness of purpose and a willingness to feel and to feel complex things in print that was rare even in the past golden days of Australian journalism. And those emotions of admiration and excitement and sitting on the edge of one's seat reading came to me again very recently when I was reading your story, your memoir almost, about the unpublished writings of Patrick White. And those kinds of exercises seem to me to be flawless jewels, and there is something beautiful, there can be something beautiful even in daily journalism. But my path has taken me down different roads recently, and I've found it necessary to try to explore some themes which are set out in this book and its predecessors. And with this happy day when you're all here, a publication cycle of a kind comes to a close, a cycle which is marked out almost by a decade of journeying and inquiring and being instructed by the men and women I have come across along the road. Through great good fortune, I've found a number of friends on this writing journey. My publisher, Chris, who just spoke to Maury and Anna, Wendy, Alison, my agent, Margaret Connolly. I thank you all from the bottom of my heart for the support and the love that you've extended to me, which alone have made possible my own steps forward. That sounds like a formal expression of gratitude. It's not. It's simply the literal truth that the figure of the writer operating in solitude and slow silence has no meaning, is nothing without the reader. The word is nothing without the pulsation back from the attending imagination. There is no point if one has no hope of being read and felt and understood. What I believe am striving for is to escape the confines of the self, to escape the prison house of self, to escape biographical details and the circumstances that are given to us, the hand that we're dealt, and to find other things, to soar elsewhere, to learn other things. And somehow that seems inextricably linked to the idea of communication, as Karel Kupka, the Czech precursor in this book, was so fond of believing. He felt art was a form of communication, and on this point I must say he and I differ slightly, but it is clearly very close to the heart of the literary impulse that one sends out. One sends out the magic boat, one sends out the paper dart, the message, and there is some hope that it will reach and lodge somewhere. And an evening like this is almost the formal closing of the chapter of that hope. Everything that you said, David, was very apposite to what it is that I imagine I'm trying to do. The structure of the Red Highway is, on the surface, episodic. Very obviously it is about a narration that refers not to the narrator, but to the gifts that are brought in to the narrative by the guests and friends and visiting presences who shape and lead it on. So, of course, like many a book, it has the shape on the surface, at least, of an education narrative or a quest narrative. But I've been wondering, as time has gone on and my distance from this book has increased, and it has gone from being my child to my friend, if you like. I've been wondering whether this is so, and I've come to feel more that it's actually a way of presenting a new world structure, one which, perhaps I should put it differently. There is a set of ideas behind the writing of this book, and that set of ideas is simple, but leads one to strange places if fully pursued, and it is this. The idea is that if one lives in such a way as to examine and to search the horizon and seek to see not only what is in the landscape, the natural landscape, the urban landscape, the human landscape, but what lies behind it, what the clues are lurking in it. If one lives in such a way as to be able to see those things, then new patterns reveal themselves. And perhaps by dint of writing and probing and feeling and seeking the inmost truth that we bear, perhaps that can come out and we can have more of a picture of our lives than the dull facts of sequential history. Perhaps, too, there are things that can be thought by different people at the same time. There are things that are seen by people. There are images that repeat in life, and perhaps they give us some clue to the hidden beauties and the hidden grace of nature and life and the consciousness that we inhabit for such a short time. And those are some of the ideas that I now feel were animating the journey which is recounted in this story. It's taken me some time to come to see it that way, but I feel it's important for authors not to be too doctrinaire about what they write. They can leave their doctrinaire thoughts at the door, and they can apply their doctrinaire thoughts to other books, and they can be normative about the rest of the world, but not about themselves. And this is very much a book which wishes to be a dream text. It wishes to be European and questioning just as much as it wishes to be of the desert and of the north and certain and harsh. And it is, of course, about the confluence between those two elements in our society and those of us who travel with that baggage into that world. I hope that you appreciate your own journey down the Red Highway, should you take it. And I'm terribly grateful to you all for coming this evening to mark its launch. Thank you very much.